I'm going to be looking for a job at Cranes after this. So Warren, I had this dream. I was interviewing Warren Buffett. I'm going to tell you about
nightmare.
it. Yeah, no. First question I have, I just read in the paper, or online probably, that you made your first bet, your first official bet of your life, because I think what you do normally is not betting. It's informed decision making. So tell us about Nebraska. Who were they playing?
They were playing Fresno State. And, yeah, normally I like to be the house. Yeah, but I was at the MGM for the Floyd Mayweather fight, and I was walking by the sports book, and it said 12.5 points, Nebraska, Fresno State. And I like to buy mispriced things. And so I went up, and I said, "Are you sure?" The guy said, "Yeah." You know,
would that be it, right? Well, was that picture up there? Yeah, somebody snapped a picture. Now, you told me backstage here that you thought maybe the line moved. People were following you to
yeah, what happened is when I made the bet, there a bunch of guys came over. And you remember that movie where Meg Ryan says, "I'll have what she's having," you know? Well,
I do remember that.
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite as much fun as that, but but yeah, I got a lot of guys followed me up and said they wanted to buy this, do what I did.
And you won big.
It was really a mispriced. It was a mispriced game. We'd had a lousy game the week before, but it didn't mean anything.
Yeah. So there's this stock I heard about. I don't know if you heard about it. It hit its new all-time high today by the name of Berkshire Hathaway. I guess you're pretty pleased.
That has a nice ring to it.
Yeah. And that just beat the new high yesterday, correct?
It really doesn't make any difference, except in terms of giving away, you give away more money. But
we have some stuff for you on that later.
It doesn't. It doesn't change my life in any way, shape, or form. I've never sold a share of Berkshire in my life. So,
but it's still exciting, right? Exciting.
It's fun to have it. You know what? It'll be 50 years next May since I took over, and I spent my life working on it. So
that's great. So I have so many questions. I don't know if we have the hours.
I don't have very many answers.
Yes.
Space them out.
So let's talk a little bit here about Detroit. So what happened? What do you think from the outside? Omaha or New York? You spend your time pretty much Omaha and New York with the two main places. What is your view? What happened here from the outside looking in?
Well, the biggest thing, the finances got out of hand, and that's happened to plenty of cities before. 40 years ago in New York, it was on its back, and the President of the United States actually said that New York dropped dead. That was a famous
headline. He didn't mean it, though, right?
No, but they felt he meant it in New York. It was a headline in the New York Daily News. President of New York dropped dead. But the city they lost their credit, and everybody was fighting with everybody else. The unions, the politicians, the bankers, the business people. They were all mad at each other. But they sat down and they actually worked out a solution that was like a bankruptcy, but it wasn't an official one. They set up something called Big Mac, and Felix Roden was involved, but Victor Gottbaum from the unions was involved, and they worked out something that made sense. Now it didn't transform things in a day or a week or a month, but just look what's happened. I mean, cities, they have an inherent strength and vibrance. I mean, you've got great headquarters. Companies in Detroit, and that's enormously important. It's been important in Omaha, but
speaking of headquarters, if I had done my research correctly, your funds or one of your funds under Berkshire owns 2% or something of General Motors, and you guys just added to the position.
Yeah, we've got two fellows that one of whom we hired maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and the other one 2 to 3 years ago. I hired them. When I hired them, they managed $1 billion each, but I've kept giving them more money to manage.
Sooner or later, that adds up, billion.
Yeah, well, they're up to $9 billion apiece now,
yeah.
And when I'm not in the picture, they'll be running a couple $100 billion.
That's not.
And they're terrific guys.
Go ahead.
But one of them has about close to 15% of his fund in General Motors stock. And actually, when Mary Barra came out 3 or 4 months ago, this fellow's name is Ted Weschler, and the three of us went out to lunch. And
how'd that go?
Well, I was enormously impressed with her, and as I drove her down in my 2000, probably a little Freudian slip there, my 2006 Cadillac, I said, Mary, is the new one any better than this? Well, I got a rather fulsome answer to that, and so the next day I told my daughter, I said, go out and buy me one of these new Cadillacs, and I wrote Mary about it later. But Mary is, she is a real car guy. I will tell you that. You can just tell. She has a.
It looks like a car guy. Yeah.
She has a passion for it.
Yep.
I love it when CEOs have a passion for their business. It's enormously important. If I had a one-line employment form, I'd almost say, "Are you passionate about what you do?" Because it works, and she really is, and she knows cars forwards and backwards. She's really good.
So, what is your view overall of the Detroit automobile makers, and now post-bankruptcy? It's been 3-4 years now. What's their future look like? I know you study all these numbers and everything else. So,
well, the American public, and of course, worldwide too. But when I was 16, I was only thinking about two things: cars and girls. I wasn't very good with girls, so it kind of narrowed it down a little bit. But although if you had the right car, it helped with girls too.
That's true.
Americans love cars. They're in love with their cars, and it all started here too. So there's really nothing more quintessentially American than the car, and I think people feel that the world over. They're driving American cars.
But you probably wouldn't have bought 2% of General Motors 7-8 years ago, right? What from an investor standpoint changed that at least you allowed your guy, or he decided to?
Well, it's his decision. I should say that.
Okay.
But the car business, it got rationalized to some degree by what it went through a few years ago. But they'll always sell a lot of cars. Predicting who's going to sell them and how much money they're going to make per car is another question. Yep. But we're going to sell, it's going to be almost 17 million cars this year, and that was down around 9 and a fraction, not that long ago. Yep. The American public will always love cars. You can always get people's eyes to light up if you show them a new car.
Do you think the U.S. federal government should have bailed out General Motors?
Yeah, I publicly, on March 6th, 2009, I was asked that question on CNBC, and you can look up the answer. I wouldn't have guessed I would have given that answer maybe 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But it was so clear to me in 2009 that, A, it would work, because you want to do something that's going to work, but the idea that you should let the financial condition, of the company destroy it when you had so much going for it over time, and it was so important to America. And you get into parts suppliers and dealers and finance operators. It would have been a death blow, in my view, if Washington had thumbed its nose at the car companies then. And so I declared myself publicly on that. And the country, if you think of what would have happened, it didn't cost them anything in the end, speak of anyway. If you think of what would have happened if they made the other decision, you could write a book about it. What if the government had said no? Yeah. It would not be a pretty story.
I don't know if we'd be sitting here right now.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
I actually give a lot of credit. You can argue about how we got in all the trouble we did in 2008, 2009, and there were plenty of blame to go around and all that. But once September 2008 hit, I was not a Bush supporter, but Bush did the right thing. And you had Bernanke, and you had Paulson, and you later had Geithner, and you had Obama. Those people did what was in the interest of the country. Now I said it was a lot like Pearl Harbor. Maybe those ships shouldn't have all been in the harbor.
Right.
But once the attack came, there was no sense the Army blaming the Navy for having too great a concentration and the Navy getting defensive. We had a war on, and we had a survival war for the economy going on.
How does this work for so all of us? So it's 2008. The world is melting down. Does President Bush or Obama, or I guess at that time Bush or Geithner, you getting calls in Omaha? Is it ringing off the hook? What's going on in your office in Omaha?
Well, people that are looking for money call.
Okay. Just like, hey, Warren, country's going down.
How's my favorite guy in Omaha? Yeah.
And your assistant.
I started looking like George Clooney, you know. I mean,
Debbie, who I've met several times, and she's, I got a flavor of who works for who backstage there. Yeah, but does she screen? Like, will she screen the price? Say, no, I'll get back to you, Mr. President. I mean, how does it work?
She does that. I haven't heard about it.
Okay.
No, but it was interesting because George Bush, and I give him enormous credit for this. I didn't vote for him, but he came out and he issued the 10 most important words in the history of economics. I mean, Adam Smith back in 1776 talked about the specialization of labor, the invisible hand, and you had Keynes talk about animal spirits and all these things. George Bush came out on the White House lawn and he said, if money doesn't loosen up, this sucker can go down. Now, that is a great, great academic statement.
That was. I'd sort of be interested to see the first version of that before they.
Yeah, well,
because they agreed on that one. They said,
but he, in effect, he let both the Treasury, and of course he doesn't have control over the Fed, but nevertheless, the Fed has to be in sync. But Bernanke and Paulson could then say, we'll do whatever it takes. If you remember, when the American public really got scared was when money market funds broke the buck.
Yeah.
35 million Americans at the start of September thought $3.5 trillion of their money was safe in money market funds. And then in 1 week, they got worried about it. And 175 billion flowed out of money market funds in 3 days in mid to late September. And that was just starting. It's an interesting thing. The Treasury, Hank Paulson, in effect guaranteed money market funds at that time. He did it with something called, I forget the currency or the economic stabilization fund. That was a fund that was set up in 1934 when we changed the price of gold. And we had a profit because we changed the price of gold. So we just stuck it in this fund at that time. Nobody ever dreamt it would be used for guaranteeing money market funds. I'm not sure that the authority existed to do it. But the right thing to do was to do it.
Did somebody back there, some lawyers, say, hey, there's this 1934 thing we can do, or did they just do something and then rely back?
I think they just decided they had to do it.
Yeah.
And, if they had to call it, soybean support
right.
stuff, they would have gone to the soybean funds. I mean, but you needed that then. There was nobody but the whole American public and American business needed to deleverage. And there was only one party that could leverage up, and that was the U.S. government, and they did it right, and I tipped my hat to them.
So speaking of guaranteeing big entities and big potential calamities, and we saw that, in essence, the federal government did that with New York City in the 70s, do you think Detroit should have been, in essence, bailed out of the bankruptcy? Would that have been better for the country and for the city?
Well, I think as long as the bankruptcy is handled fairly quickly, bankruptcy is fine. I mean, that is how you clean the slate. General Motors went bankrupt. They did it in a hurry. It was prepackaged in effect.
Yeah.
But they got rid of some things that shouldn't have been done in the past, and they made themselves competitive for the future. And now they're employing I don't know how many thousands of people. So one way or another, if you make terrible mistakes in the past, you can do it as an individual. I mean, millions of people do it, and they make a mistake, and the world allows you to clear the slate, and you don't do it without cost. But it was important that Detroit clear the slate, and it looks to me like they're doing it promptly, and I salute you for it.
So you told me something interesting a few months ago. Warren was in Detroit in November of just last year for the launch of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 business thing, and we were driving you back to the airport, and you said something to me about, you see that bridge over there? And I said, yeah. He said, I almost bought that bridge one day. And he was talking about the Ambassador Bridge.
Yeah.
I was pretty shocked about that. Can you tell, I think everybody would be interested in hearing how that, because you might have been a pretty good owner for that bridge, come to think of it. But, you know, so, tell us,
Maddie's made me look good.
so how, what exactly, I was shocked to hear that. I did not know that.
Well, what happened, when I got out of school in 1951, I took all the Moody's manuals, and there were 4 or 5 of them, the industrials, the banks, and finance, about 10,000 pages. And I was 20 years old then, and I just turned the page, and I went through and looked at every company for 10,000 pages. And it was in the transportation manual, interestingly enough. They had both the Detroit International Bridge and they had the Detroit and Canada Tunnel. Yeah. And those were both quite interesting. So I started following them. And then in the 1970s, we bought a fair amount of stock in the bridge. There was a fellow named Phil Correa at Pioneer Fund owned a fair amount. They actually put my partner Charlie Munger on the board, and I think we got up to 20-odd%. And the Canadians were kind of holding us up on that at that point. There was, I think there was something called FIRA, the Foreign Investment Review Act, and they just held it up long enough so that Matty got interested, and he came in and started bidding against us, and he ended up owning the bridge.
Oh, yeah, that's too bad.
As I understand, the tolls went up just a little bit after that.
Yeah. Oh, there hasn't been any issues in the last 4 or 5 years.
I remember at the time when we looked at it, the tunnel was terribly crowded, so it didn't really look like you could handle much more capacity with the tunnel, whereas the bridge is one hell of a bridge.
Right. In reading your books over the years, that's always sort of been a thing with yours, almost metaphorically and actually literally. Bridges, toll booths, things like that. Where did that thinking actually come from?
Yeah, well, it was in there were not a lot of other ways to cross. Yeah. You had this unusual situation where half of it was in Canada and half of it was in the United States, which complicated things. As I remember, this goes back 40 or 50 years, but as I remember, there was a liquor store there, that was just tiny, that was making a fortune. I don't know which side of the bridge it was on, but that's the closest I've ever come. I owned about a quarter of a bridge, but owning a quarter of a bridge really doesn't quite do the job.
No, it doesn't. So, what is your view of what Detroit has to do to get the confidence or keep building the confidence of people outside Detroit, or even we have a bunch of what we're terming as expats here. I don't know if I totally like that word, because I think most people are tied to Detroit in some way, shape, or form, and you don't want to make people feel otherwise. But how do you continue to gain the momentum for particularly people who have nothing to do with Detroit?
Yeah, well, headquarters companies are terribly important. I mean, the cities get in the business world somewhat identified by headquarters cities. I think athletic teams are very important in terms of just the spirit of a town. And
there's one in Cleveland, that they got a pretty good player. So
is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But what was his name?
But what is there anything that we all could do, or that you see different from the outside? Again, being an astute investor like you are, is there any kind of actions that could be taken or should be taken, do you think?
I think when you do look at headquarters, you look at transportation, you look at philanthropy within a town to see just how much the citizens of the town care about their own town. There are a number of variables like that. We've looked at, in fact, we've had a contract virtually to buy one business up here, and you mentioned we almost bought the bridge. We've looked at others. I mean, we would buy a company in Detroit today, and we'd be happy to have the headquarters here.
Would you have said that 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago?
It's much better after the bankruptcy than before. I mean, if you see a bankruptcy coming, that is not encouraging.
Yep.
I mean, well, if you were a parts supplier to an auto company, you'd have worried plenty.
Yep.
In early 2009. I mean, your destiny would depend on what happened with somebody. So, but that's past. And so you've got prosperous home office companies here. I mean, a company like your own, you're going to be employing a lot more people 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I'll put it this way: you bought a lot of real estate around here.
Yeah, a little bit.
If you want to sell me half of it at your cost, I'll take it. You got witnesses out there.
Well, it depends what we throw in with it. That might be, but casinos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I kind of like those safe deposit boxes in the basement of the Bank of the Commonwealth building.
Actually, that's a true story. We took Warren for a tour, and down at the Chrysler House, which was the Dime building, they preserved these old safety boxes, and so you only open up a few at a time because it's not like the Geraldo Rivero thing where there's nothing in it. So he opens it up. There's the only guy. There's $1 in there. No one else. It's a true story.
Yeah.
But the only guy that found the $1.
Dan wanted to sell me the whole group of unopened boxes, and of course he had this one fake box that he'd already opened. They put a whole bunch of money in that. They call that salting the mind.
So, oh man. Okay, so let's talk about this concept of coming home. There's this concept of coming home. All these people, in essence, here, these very successful people in the room, a lot of them, come home. You stayed in Omaha. You never moved to New York permanently as your primary home. And there's another guy I mentioned earlier. Went from that glitz all down in South Beach and decided to come home. Do you think that's becoming, more of a trend? Or I guess actually the first question. Why didn't you ever move out of Omaha?
I could live any place I want, and I could do business any place I want. And I could not live better than I live now. Yeah. I could spend more money than I spend now. I bet the cost of living and the standard of living, up to a certain point, correlate pretty well.
But I'm going to make an assumption that's not why you didn't move out of Omaha.
Well, but I'm in a house I've been in now for 56 years. That's about a quarter of the lifetime of the country. 1/4 of the lifetime of the country. My kids grew up there. They were happy there. Our house was kind of a neighborhood center. The kids all came over. Now, 50 years later, when my daughter's friends come back town, they want to come to the house. They want to see me wandering around in the bathroom eating popcorn just like they did 50 years ago. It's 5 minutes.
Were you eating popcorn in the bathroom?
In the bathrobe.
Oh, bathrobe. I'm sorry.
I'd be in there going through these Moody's manuals looking at Detroit International Bridge.
I got you.
But I'd wander in, make some popcorn, and they went to the same schools, public schools, that my father went to. Their kids have gone to those schools. Their grandchildren have gone to my grandchildren have gone to those schools. There's a continuity of life. You know the people. You know the doctors. You know everything about it. And they're good experiences. Now, if I move out to Palm Springs or something like that, I may have great neighbors too. I'll probably never know them. I mean, in my zip code, there are over 100 shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway. I'm with friends as long as the stock's up anyway. I mean,
probably going to take you to dinner.
When you've got 100 shareholders in your zip code, I mean, when you go out trick-or-treating, you do all right. I mean.
That's good. So Warren, you've been known to have some great quotes over the years. Here it says, "You can't produce a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant."
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
It means that there's some things that can't be hurried up. Like building a brand or something of the sort. Okay. I mean, you can't build a brand in a week or a month. I mean, there's some things you have to set out to do that that there's a given timetable to, and you've got to be willing to play it through to the end. And you won't necessarily have somebody declaring you the winner 10% the time horizon, the natural time horizon of the task you set out to do. And if you can't stand that time horizon, forget about getting on that, on that particular task.
Why do you think there is such a impulse for people to have to trade in and out of their investments and trade in and out of whatever it is, bonds or commodity? I mean, do you think it's the thrill of it? Because you can look at all the great philosophies that you've had, but probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you do a better Warren Buffett imitation than anybody I know.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So, I want to get imitating my signature on checks. Or
So, but I would say it's the ability to stay with your conviction and hold on, and because you believe in the business. That one concept itself seems to be elusive for so many people. Why do you think that is?
It's so simple too. I mean, if you were looking at a small private business in Omaha and you had some money to buy into, maybe it's a McDonald's stand, maybe it's a dry cleaning establishment,
big furniture store.
What would you think about? You wouldn't think about, what Janet Yellen's going to say next week, or something. You wouldn't be listening to the chatter on TV. You'd be thinking about the competitive advantage you might have, who might compete with you, what the return on capital is, what kind of a partner you're going to have in running it, all of the things that are fundamental to a business. Yeah. The biggest problem most people have is they don't think about a stock as being a part of a business. Mm-hmm. Now, when they buy a farm, they think they're buying a farm, and they say how many bushels of corn will it produce, or how many bushels of soybean will it produce in an average year? What are the taxes? What do I have to pay the tenant farmer? They look at it as an actual farming business. When they buy an apartment house, they say, what can I rent it for? How much vacancy will I have? What will it cost me to manage it? How often do I have to replace the roof? All of it. They look at it as a business. But when they look at a stock, a lot of people, when they look at a stock, they just look at it as something that people say may go up, or maybe it'll split next week, or or somebody's got a target price on it. Can you imagine having a target price on a farm or an apartment house? It's crazy. Yep. So the key thing is to think about a stock as a part of a business. Just forget about the stock part.
Do you think people don't, or the vast majority of people don't, just because you can trade it?
Yeah, exactly. Liquidity makes them do stupid things.
Yeah.
The very fact, liquidity, which should be your friend.
Yes.
The fact that you can get out of it 10 minutes later, which you can't do with a farm or an apartment house, that should be your friend. But they turn it into a negative. My old boss, Ben Graham, talked about having a partner named Mr. Market. And Mr. Market, when you own a stock, Mr. Market comes around every day. Let's say it's General Motors, and he names you a price at which you can either buy more from him or you can sell to him. Mm-hmm. Now imagine having a McDonald's stand, and you got one partner, and that partner comes around, and someday they're building a Burger King across or a Kentucky Fried, and he gets pessimistic, so he names a low price because he's afraid you're going to sell to him. So you buy from him.